Take a pit stop for all things NASCAR with the Four Tire Change podcast. Here is your host, Dawson Iserlo.
Welcome back into the Four Tire Change podcast. I am your host, Dawson Iserlo. Appreciate everybody for tuning in and chiming in last week as we discussed Atlanta. What an incredible race it was. And of course, talking this week about Las Vegas. Man, this was the first kind of regular reset race of the year, and there was a lot going on there. So we're going to recap that. I'll be solo one more time. Next week, what I'm going to do, I think we're going to catch back up with Chris Fusaro, and we're going to recap the first 4 races of the season. I was talking about the best way to do it with him. Feel like it makes the most sense after you have 4 races, 2 drafting tracks, 2 or 1 intermediate, 1 kind of short track. That's a great time to kind of reset and evaluate things where they are. So that will be coming up next week. But for right now, I'm not going to be too long on this one because it was a somewhat uneventful week over in NASCAR. But we'll start with what happened there in Vegas. So, you know, it was interesting. We did get to see the show and tell, so to speak, of the NASCAR penalties, and the Joey Logano webbed glove was on display. Logano seemed really embarrassed about the whole situation. I thought it was hilarious, by the way. It looks like a Spider-Man glove. And look, it's ingenuity. With NASCAR pushing the boundaries of the rule book is tradition in NASCAR, and it has been that way forever. So I wasn't shocked to see that. I wasn't shocked to I was a little bit surprised they showed, although I think that's part of what NASCAR wants to do now. They are trying to show you things like this so that people can stay informed on it. This race, I don't want to say it played out the way I thought it would, but it kind of did. My first official race pick I made on the pod, I said Kyle Larson, and I'm 1 for 1. Don't expect that to be a recurring theme, but for now, hey, I can say I'm 100%. And that was based on previous, knowing how good Larson is at the intermediate tracks, knowing how much speed Hendrick usually brings, the question marks with the new car bodies of Ford and Toyota, wondering if it'll take some time for them to dial it in. And all that kind of played out. Like, Larson dominated this race. He wins stage 1, he wins stage 2, and he wins the race. So, that's maybe a sign of things to come, or maybe these other cars are going to catch up. Tyler Reddick was the only car to really challenge him there. And, that's a good sign, at least for Toyota's sake, that he was up there and challenging. I think the Toyotas and the Fords were also okay. Like, Blaney ended up with a top 5 run. So, that was cool to see. The only big thing here, you had Buescher lose a wheel. That was a tough break for that team. You had William Byron with the trash bag incident. So Byron might have had a car that was capable of challenging for the race win, but it never ended up mattering because he had this trash bag on the front of the grill. The car got way overheated. It was pretty dangerous for him. Luckily for them, they didn't burn up the motor, and he actually came back and finished 10th overall. So all in all, I think a pretty fortuitous situation, although the entire reason they were in that spot is just some bad luck in general. The wind's blowing, you get some debris going on the track, and unfortunately, it ended up wrapping right around the front grill there. And, there's really no way to get that off except to come down pit road. So they did so, but they battled back, and credit that 24 team. I think we know that they're going to be a factor all year. They already have a race win, so we know they're in the playoffs, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves, I would imagine, salvaging a top 10 after that. And figuring out what that day ended up looking like. Some results here as we go through the field, because again, I don't have a ton to say on this race. I will say this, by the way, if people who tuned in for the first 2 races are kind of newer fans, you get to see an intermediate race that doesn't look really anything like those first 2. And this one was pretty uneventful, but look, we had good racing at times. We know this new car, the next gen car, has been better with the intermediate racetracks and everything like that. So, I think everything that people saw maybe was surprising to some, but I think that's what we're going to continue to see. And I think some of those races will be better. You'll get some better finishes. You'll get some late restarts that'll change things up. But all in all, I didn't have any issue with the racing. We'll talk about what we're going to maybe expect to see at Phoenix coming up in a little bit here. Ty Gibbs, he finishes top 5. He's in 5th. Ross Chastain gets a 4th place. That's big for that team. They continue to look strong here. I mentioned Blaney, who finished 3rd, Reddick in 2nd. Noah Gragson, top 10 finish, 6th place. Stewart Haas, obviously, he already had to overcome the penalties. Everybody made fun of him for being in the negative in points. He gets a lot of points back. Unfortunately for him, he's still buried in the 30s. But maybe Stewart Haas isn't as dead as we kind of proclaimed that they were. And he's going to be running a paint scheme this week that looks like a Danica Patrick throwback. It's not. But regardless, big finish for Gregson. Big result for that team. You saw 2 of the Joe Gibbs cars there with Truex and Hamlin, 7th and 8th. And then Logano in 9th and Byron. So not a ton of surprises there. But going through the field, look, Carson Hocevar is a top 15 for Spire. I think that's big to see. Eric Jones was 14th for Legacy. Nice to see some cars mixed in there. Ricky Stenhouse bounced back a little bit in that 47 car. He was in the top 20, as well as Daniel Hemrick. So some kind of somewhat solid results for those teams and some of those, lower tier teams that we think of getting in the right spot. Tough run for Front Row Motorsports. Michael McDowell, Todd Gilliland, 24th and 25th, respectively. Tough runs for some guys who are trying to compete this year. Bubba Wallace had the bad luck. Of course, there he ends up finishing 35th. Chris Buescher, who we already talked about, in dead last. Christopher Bell in 33rd and Corey LaJoie in 32nd. So those are all guys, LaJoie we think maybe has a chance to compete this year. The others we all consider to be playoff contenders, and they all really struggled. So that's something to keep in mind as you move, trying to not dig yourself into a hole. That allows us to also take a look at the point standings. Kyle Larson takes control of first place with the victory. Now 8 points clear of Ryan Blaney. And of course, he has that win and he is locked into the playoffs as well. When you look at the top five, you go Larson, Blaney, Truex. Again, Martin Truex Jr. just knows how to rack up points here, whether or not he's quiet on the track, because I don't feel like we've talked about him much. And there you go. He's third in points. William Byron is fourth. That's not surprising. And Ross Chastain's fifth. Really solid to see for Trackhouse. They also have his teammate Daniel Suarez in eighth, so a great start to the year. But how about Kyle Busch in sixth place? Again, hasn't been, he had his chances at Daytona. We talked about that a little bit. He's had speed elsewhere, was really good at Atlanta at times, and he's running nicely. Chase Elliott's in seventh, even though, again, he has also kind of been fairly quiet throughout the start of the season. The only guy in the top 16 that I think is a big surprise, although you have Eric Jones and John Hunter Nemechek, the two legacy teammates, are 15th and 16th. That's good for them. But how about Austin Cindric in 11th? That's somewhat surprising. And if he can keep it going for Penske, that could be really, really big for them moving forward as well. LaJoie in 17th, Daniel Hemrick in 19th. Kind of surprised that he's had that much success with colleagues so far. But then you look down the list here. Austin Dillon's in 27th, Brad Keselowski 28th, Josh Berry with Stewart Haas is in 30th. We know about the penalty. Gregson in 34th, or didn't have the penalty there. Gregson and Preece, who are 34th and 36th, did have the penalty. So for Stewart Haas, the start to their season right now, luckily for them, Chase Briscoe has at least been able to mitigate that a little bit, but he's only 20th. It's not like he's running great. Past him, they are 30th, 34th, and 36th in points. So that's when I say, you've seen some flashes for them having a little bit of speed at Las Vegas, but all in all, it's still really a struggle right now for Stewart Haas Racing. We'll see if they can figure some of that out. Phoenix is the next stop, and obviously it's important for several different reasons. The biggest of which I would kind of argue is that you're going to have your preview of the championship race. So if you have speed now, that means you have a good chance to have speed later. And hopefully for some of these teams who want to be in the top four, they're going to need that. So we'll get a chance to look at that. This is also the new short track package. We've talked about that in the past, kind of what's going to go into that. When I had Bob Pockrass on, he talked about NASCAR's hopes here with the plan. He talked about, what the actual changes are going to be. But I have heard, from people around the garage, a lot of, or let's say a lack of optimism about whether or not this is going to change the racing at the short tracks. I don't know enough about the technicalities about it. And I've told you that before. You've got these simplified rear diffusers. They have fewer vertical strakes. Again, I don't know enough about the mechanical side of it to know what kind of impact that's going to have on the racing or to even try to speculate. You also have the reduced downforce, or to compensate for it, you have the taller rear spoiler going from 2 to 3 inches, same across the rear deck. So, look, I hope it gives us better racing. I think the Phoenix races have been a little bit underwhelming as of late. I would love for our championships to rotate instead of staying at Phoenix. But the bottom line is it really matters what you do this weekend, because it's your chance to get notes and get ready to come back. And it doesn't mean the cars that run top 5 are going to run top 5 again. But we have seen, if you're historically really good there, you have a good opportunity to do so again in the championship race. And, like we always say, that's only going to matter for 4 drivers who are a part of the championship 4, and you obviously have to get there. But for your teams like Hendrick and Gibbs that we know are going to be there in the end, this is a big weekend, I think, for them to not only try to finish well, but to really have their notepad out. And even if they don't get maybe the result they want in this race, those teams want to leave Phoenix with the confidence that they know what adjustments they need to make when we come back in November. And so that's the biggest thing I'm looking for in this type of race. What can we learn now that's going to help us in the end? As far as picking a race winner, I was really tempted to go with Ross Chastain because he did, of course, win the championship race, even though he wasn't eligible to win the championship. So therefore it went to Ryan Blaney. But I think Penske's had a lot of success at Phoenix. Now, maybe they haven't always had it early in the season, but I do think that Penske's success is going to be there. For me, it came down to either Joey Logano or William Byron, and I'm going to go with Logano. He's been qualifying really well all year, maybe sometimes with some help from some illegal aids there, as we've learned about, but I think he does it again. And I think that Penske's success remains. I think Logano's up there. I think Blaney will have a good run, and maybe even Austin Cindric. But in the end, I'm going to make my pick for Joey Logano. It should be a fun one. It should be a fun race. Again, I'm more interested to kind of see what we learn for later in the year. But somebody's going to get a win, likely punch their ticket to the playoffs, unless we have a repeat here from the first few weeks, and we will see where we go. That'll do it for this week's episode of Four Tire Change. Again, next week we'll have Chris Fusaro back on. We're going to be recapping the first 4 races of the season, including this one at Pheonix, and talking about a whole lot more. It should be a lot of fun. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will roll along in the NASCAR season here with Four Tire Change.